about 5 minutes after. So I want to welcome everybody, certainly welcome you to the conference, the Center of Excellence's Conference, Equity from the Start. My name is Frances Duran, and I'm going to be your session facilitator today. I'm pleased to be joined by Jackie Bing, who's going to be our technology host. Just as a reminder, as you probably just saw, the session is going to be recorded. Transcription is available for those who are interested through the Zoom platform. The way we're going to do questions today, certainly if you have any, you can post them in the chat as we go along, but unless there's something really pressing or time sensitive, we're going to have questions at the end of the presentation. And we also want to let you know before we begin that the views, policies, and opinions expressed in the presentation are those of the author and not necessarily those of SAMHSA and HHS. So I want to give the full time to our presenters. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our presenter, whom we are affectionately calling Doc Holliday. So we know you all are going to really enjoy what she has to share with you now. So I will turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Dr. Amanda Holliday Bembridge, and thank you, Frances. Like she said, that's a mouthful, so I go by Doc Holliday for short. And I'm excited to be able to share with you today what I'm calling How Other People Do It, unlocking our implicit biases regarding parenting practices to deepen relationships with families. So the first thing we're going to do is go through a bunch of different parenting beliefs that come from the Adult Adolescent Parenting Inventory, also known as the AAPI-2. And the reason we're going to look at these statements is because it's going to help us to identify our personal biases. Now, each time that a quote comes up in pink, I want you to just notice your initial reaction. Not judging, there's no right or wrong, it is what it is. Do you agree with the statement? Do you disagree? Does it trigger anything for you? Are there any really strong feelings about it? And the reason that we're going to do this, as you'll see, we'll go through, is because we want to think through and then talk about how our reactions to these types of parenting statements affect our work with families and caregivers. I'm going to do my best to say parents, families, and caregivers as inclusively as I can, but please know I do mean them interchangeably for this presentation. All right, everyone ready? Ooh. There. Okay, so the first one, we'll start off nice and easy. Children should always sleep in their own bed. Just noticing, what are your feelings about this statement? Do you agree? Do you feel strongly either way? So according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, they recommend babies are put to sleep on their back in a flat Consumer Product Safety Commission approved crib, bassinet, portable crib, no other toys, pillows, items, and they firmly state that babies should never co-sleep. Now, this is in direct conflict to how babies sleep around the world. In urban families in China, babies sleep with their paternal grandmother. Babies sleep with older relatives in other countries, such as the Mayan babies in Guatemala, in Japanese families. This is common, and this is something that we need to be aware of when we are talking with families and caregivers about sleeping routines. We can be held to those standards of where we work and what rules we have to follow and what advice that we give, but we want to make sure that we have our personal feelings about this statement under something that we're aware of, so that when we are having these conversations, we want to make sure that they're inclusive and not off-putting to the other people. And then you have some other instances like sleeping in car seats and strollers. Sometimes you just, you couldn't get that baby to sleep all night and they finally fell asleep and you just don't want to wake them up. You don't want to move them out of that car seat. Completely, as a parent myself, I completely get that. You definitely never wake a sleeping baby, right? But we also know that for best practices that we do need to move that child out of the car seat, that is not a safe sleeping position for a long time. That may not be information that everyone has. They may not realize that it is a safety concern more than just letting the baby sleep where they are. And then we can get to even a more fun idea of sleeping outdoors. That is considered normal and healthy in some countries such as Finland, Sweden, Denmark, even in below freezing temperatures. It's common. Every kid will nap outside. They are warm inside of their strollers. They're cuddled and inside their fuzzy blankets, but they do sleep outside. And it is common that you will see strollers lined up outside of like a cafe where the adults may be inside monitoring from the window. But that is normal. So when we're thinking about this, when we have families coming with all different beliefs and different ways of seeing the world and what's normal for them, we have to remember that this is not something that's crazy. You know, we may look at it and be like, oh my God, that's nuts. It's freezing. Why would you put a baby outside, right? But this is what's normal for someone else. And then we have to have that flexibility to be able to understand their point of view, whether or not we personally agree with it, whether or not we would personally do it for our own children. But it really helps to make sure that we're able to take that person's point of view. Okay, I got a lot of these, so I'm not going to go as in depth with all of them, but I want you to get an idea for some of them. Now let's go to a spicy one. Hitting out of love is different than hitting out of anger. Spanking is an effective way to discipline a child. Now, I say spicy because when I give this presentation, no matter where I have done it or what group I have been in front of, there are strong feelings on these statements. And there's definitely strong feelings either way. And I think that is one interesting thing that has come up sometimes, is that I think we sometimes assume all of our colleagues think the same way, that we're all in this work together and we have very, similar upbringing and training and beliefs. And then you realize that there is a lot of elements of cultural differences between us based on our previous experiences. So I'm not here to condone or endorse physical punishment. What I'm bringing up is just to make sure everyone is aware of the variety of beliefs that can exist on one topic. This is especially culturally bound by where we grew up, at what point in time we grew up, the culture of where we were. These are very long-standing tied beliefs. And our laws vary by state, by country. What's acceptable in one place would call CPS in another. We have to remember, in some parts of the country, corporal punishment is still allowed in schools. The parents are aware and they sign off on it, but that is still, in their view, an effective way to discipline a child. And they feel that, that's an acceptable method. And now these statements are not even tiptoeing into the effects of verbal, emotional, or psychological types of punishment or abuse that could also be included here. So again, knowing how you feel when you read those statements, especially if that's something that really bothers you, if it just does not sit well with you, it's something you want to be aware of, and you want to make sure that if this conversation is coming up with someone that feels on the opposite end of the spectrum, that you have a second to take a deep breath, because you have already examined where you're coming from and where your beliefs are, and then you can open up that conversation to understand their point of view as well. All right, that's the spiciest one I have. I promise the rest won't be quite as controversial, I don't think. All right, let's get into some ideas about how we raise babies. Sentences like, tummy time is important. Toys like Baby Einstein are important for brain development. Or children under 2 years old should not watch screens, iPad, TV, or phone. Okay. I am going to start with the tummy time and take that one apart. Has anyone ever heard of a Gavora cradling? I'm going to put it this way. If you've heard of it, you can go ahead and put yes in the chat. I'm not going to assume, because we're being recorded and I know what that makes out of you and me. But I'm going to go ahead and guess that most of you have not heard of this. I've not seen a lot of yeses appearing in the chat. Have not. Oh, we got one. Okay. I had not heard this either. And this was something that I was just blown away when I was reading about the research of where this was coming from. So a researcher spent time in Tajikistan and was trying to understand the cultural parenting practices, and they learned about Gavora cradling. And what this is in this setting, it's a cradle that to me looks like the old-timey toolbox. It's kind of like a triangular little house shape, and then there's a bar at the top, so you can take it with you, and it's portable, like a lunchbox. Inside the cradle, there's a long piece of material or wood, whatever it is, that's very sturdy, and that's where the baby is placed, just like a bed. They are wrapped, they are bound, so that the child is attached to that cradle and that they are safely kept inside. and then they are catheterized. Yep, catheterized. What I found interesting was that the researcher included, and I apologize, I should have said at the beginning, all of the resources, anything that I'm quoting, I have in the PowerPoint handout, so you can read all about this too, because it's super cool. The researcher reflected like their initial feelings of this and how upsetting it was. Like, why would you do this to a baby? This is restrictive. Why is this normal? And what the researcher came to find was that this is what evolved in this area of the world. And it was the safest option that they had for the babies for long periods of time when there would not be an adult to supervise. It was not a safe environment to let the babies be on the floor or to be moving independently. At the same time, that child is a huge part of the community. Because that cradle was portable, they could be anywhere and they are the center of conversations. They have people coming around and engaging with the baby throughout the day. They are talked to, they are fed, they are very well cared for. How they are cared for is different than anything this researcher or I have ever personally experienced. So, an extreme example to show that there's going to be a wide variety on what people believe tummy time is, how important, the roles that it plays, what happens if you do or you don't have it. And when we're thinking about, ways that we restrict children's movements, we're not completely isolated from something, maybe not as extreme as the cradling, but we do use different types of restrictive seating, such as car seats, strollers, walkers, bumbo seats. There are a variety of things that are restricting children's movements. How much we do that, how often they are in it, how often they get tummy time may depend on the type of childcare facility that they're in. It may depend on the same reason, if there are adults available that can be interactive with the child at home, or if those adults are doing the 15,000 other things we have to do as caregivers, they may not be able to provide that tummy time in supervised way, right? One thing to note here, though, is that where this becomes a little bit more nuanced and important is when we're looking at the child's development, as far as if we're looking for delays, if we're looking for concerns about their the timing of their development. And one thing this researcher did note was while the children there that she was observing would have been considered delayed here, what she noticed was that yes, their physical development was delayed as compared to the time stamps that we have here of what we would like to see children needing at certain ages and stages. But all children grew to be fully capable adults that were fully functioning, participating members of their community. And I think that was a really important takeaway for me that I hope you find too, was that it's extremely important that we understand the culture in which they come from, that we need to understand where people are coming from with their beliefs and their statements, and not in such a surface way. That if this child was raised in a different place or time or space or whatever the cultural bounds might be, would they turn into a healthy, fully functioning adult in their community? That is, what I would assume we're all aiming for here, to make sure that the baby is the healthiest version of themselves that they could be. With that, I can't even begin to try to figure out the bazillions of dollars, so I'm just going to use that word, put into marketing for items for young children. It's extraordinary. When we have statements like toys like Baby Einstein are important, and I picked on this one in particular because Baby Einstein in particular was found, if you're not aware, that's a little bit more than a couple of years now, but a little while ago, there was a lawsuit brought against the company because essentially a parent sued saying, you didn't make my kid smart. You promised you'd make him a genius. They were marketing that this particular item would increase intelligence in children. And they were sued and subsequently had to remove that wording on their packaging because they were giving that false promise of this is what's going to happen when you use our product, right? And I think when we may have parents, if you are somebody that disagrees with this statement, you may have families, parents, caregivers coming to you that believe in this statement and agree with it and feel that purchasing items that are more expensive or are interactive, battery related, those types of items, I would caution you to take a step back for just a second and think about the messages that they have been receiving. Marketing is phenomenal in their ability to make us feel a certain way and cause our behavior, just like we think about with the kids. They're doing it on a very large scale. So they're going to go out there and make you feel like if you want to be a good parent, if you want the best for your child, if you care about them, if you love them, buy this thing. This is the promise, right? And it's not necessarily that the families may or may not understand the best choices for their child. It may be that they're getting bad messaging, especially with the amount that they're hearing in social media, how much is just filtering in and telling them, do this, do this, do this. And you want the best for your kid. We have to believe every caregiver does, right? So taking that time to talk more with the parents about how to do loose parts, open-ended play, why this can be good for them. I like to think about all of the incredible minds in the history of the world and the amazing feat that people have done over history and time that never had electronics and never had baby Einstein. They didn't have any of these specific apps or gadgets or items. They explored the world around them and they were able to make incredible contributions in the way that we have grown over the years, true pioneers of subjects. And reminding that that is still true in our kids. They can explore the world around them in a safe way and be able to achieve these incredible things, right? So helping to make sure that we're finding that bridge between not saying we know best and this is what's right or wrong. I caution when people ask my advice of like, oh, what should I get everybody for the holidays? And I'm not going to say one way or another, like, you must do this is, or don't buy this is bad, because almost everything can be appropriate in different situations or circumstances, right? Similarly with screens. Now, this, I'm gonna take you back a little bit. Once upon a time, if you've ever thought about, if you're a parent yourself, you probably had one of those moments of, when I'm a parent, I'll never do this. And then you became a parent. You're like, all right, I'm going to do what I can to survive. The children that we are seeing now, the 3s, 4s, 5-year-olds, we need to really consider what their life has been the last few years. They have been impacted by COVID in such a unique way that we may never fully, truly understand, right? When I think of the parents that I've worked with in the last few years who have this horrible guilt sitting with them because they agreed with this statement. They didn't want their kid to watch screens at all. There's no reason. They should just, enjoy the world around them and play. And then they were saddled with this responsibility of trying to be a full-time caregiver, trying to be a full-time parent, full-time worker at home, trying to care for other people in their family who may or may not have been sick. It's impossible to check all those boxes. And at some point, you just have to give in and say, what is the best thing I can do for my child right now, right? Maybe it is that I have to care for someone else in my family and letting my little one watch something that is mildly appropriate for them and taking a breath to know that I'm not damaging them on purpose. That's not my end goal here, right? There are other people that feel the complete opposite of like, no, it doesn't matter. It may be that they've grown up and screens have been a part of their lives on all the time. I know I've visited other people's homes where the TV is constantly on, day, night. That's just normal for them. And that background noise, constant like sensory information, the lights changing on the TV or the sound, is something that they feel is comforting. So they are sharing that with their child because it's what they feel is good and true. So we have to be able to look at this and know how you feel to that statement, what you agree or what you may do as a parent for yourself, And then figuring out how can we make sure that when we're having conversations with somebody that feels another way, how can we tiptoe into this so that we are not going to alienate or polarize them in this conversation. All right. Adults who nurture themselves make better parents and caregivers, and my childhood experiences affect the way that I parent and educate. Again, I'm not going to make any assumptions, but I'm going to guess that most of us in here are probably nodding our heads along like, yep, that makes sense. That makes sense. Because if we're in the world of infant mental health, more than likely, you know a lot about the positive cycles of self-care, regulation, co-regulation. If I take care of myself, I'm going to be in the best state possible. That allows me to be regulated, and that allows me to help co-regulate the child, right? And we see how, unfortunately, too often this spirals the opposite way. Parents either don't or can't have time for self-care. They are unregulated, and then they are sharing that dysregulation with their child. I personally feel like a really good way to approach this and make sure that we're not saying self-care like, oh, just light a candle and take a deep breath, but to really look at self-care from the perspective of this is something that is essential. It is preventative. This is part of your health. Mental health is part of all health. Um, and to help families see the connection between taking care of yourself and how that may directly impact the actions that your child is taking, right? Not to come from so much of a behaviorist standpoint, but really thinking through if the parent is focused on, this negative behavior keeps happening or this negative, and this is how I'm responding to it. Let's step back even further before we even approach that interaction and how to handle that. We need to make sure that that parent is supported and regulated, but that they see the value in that themselves as well. I'm going to also go ahead and assume that you may know some of these people that I'm going to pop up here next. If you haven't, you definitely need to go read it. When we think about Freiberg's Ghosts in the Nurseries and Lieberman's Angels in the Nurseries, we're talking about all of those pieces from our experiences and how they come forward in our work, and whether that is how we are approaching parenting for ourselves or how we're approaching the way that we are going to take care of someone else. We are always coming back to things in our past. Whether or not somebody realizes this, or in some of the cases when I've worked with, particularly working with moms, I've heard them dismiss their experiences because they compare it to, it's not as bad as. And that's their way of like, well, it could be worse. So I'm not too worried about it. Or I had a good childhood. It wasn't as bad as, right? And it's hard to do the work of sitting there and saying, maybe I didn't have a great childhood, or maybe there were some things that, because you're rocking your foundational beliefs there of what I know to be true, and rethinking your childhood. Like, this is not something you want to do right after giving birth and you have not slept through the night in quite some time because you couldn't roll over. This is really, really difficult conversations to help people think through at really sensitive points in time as well. But to help them say, you know what, just because it wasn't as bad as something else, that doesn't negate what you went through. And whether or not it was great, it was fantastic, or it was, a bad experience that you are not ready to dive into, what we want to be aware of is that what you did go through and how you were parented yourself is important, because that is going to come out in the way that you parent or you educate someone else. I know this may really depend on the type of work you're doing, the type of relationships that you have with families, especially if you're in consultation and you may be in and out. But this may be something like with your work with consultation that you want to help guide the people who are seeing the kids and the families day in and day out. This might be something that we work on really supporting the teachers to first look for themselves, to see in their histories and what they're bringing into the classroom, and then how to bring this information out to the families as well. All right, not quite as spicy as the other slide, but this one gets me every time. A good child sleeps through the night. Okay, so here's what bothers me. It drives me nuts when I hear this because of the word good. It just, this is my bias. It drives me bananas because it's a sentence that I think we've just normalized and we say it so often that we're not even thinking about the implications of saying that I'm putting this quality on this brand new person in the world of whether or not they are good based on something they can't control, right? There are so many evolutionary reasons that babies wake up throughout the night. Let's go with the most obvious. Their tummy is too small to have enough food to sustain themselves for more than a few hours, right? Now, over time, that should change. They should be able to hold on to a little bit more food, that they wouldn't be waking up starving quite as often. But that isn't a reason that the baby decides whether or not to be good. It's not something that they have a choice in. If they're hungry, their hunger cues are working. They are waking to eat because that's what they need to survive. That's a great sign. It doesn't feel like it when you've been up every 2.5 hours and you're exhausted. You can't have that same feeling in the middle of the night. So having this conversation at other points of the day, maybe with a good cup of coffee, is something that's going to be really helpful to just help reframe for families that may be having a child that is not sleeping through the night, because we want to help shift that mind frame that if we are constantly hearing, oh, they're such a good baby because they sleep, or they're such a good baby because of the way that they act or behave, we're, without saying it, we are saying that someone is not good for something that they're not doing or they're incapable of doing yet. Um, we have to think about, developmentally appropriate expectations. Babies should wake up. They have so much sensory information coming at them that they never had in the womb, and they have no idea what to do with it. They are completely immobile. They're dependent on us for everything. They can't take off a layer when they feel hot. They can't scratch that itch on the side. Or if they hear a strange noise, they don't know what to do with it yet, right? They haven't had enough life experience to tune it out and say, okay, that was actually just a truck passing by. It's fine. It's not really scary, but that was annoying. It woke me up, right? This is a lot of good reasons why babies are waking, and things, again, we needed evolutionary. If we didn't wake up like this, if we slept as soundly as we would like to way back when, we'd be dead more often. Predators would just take full advantage of us being that unconscious in a deep sleep, right? So as a baby, we have to look at them as these itty bitties, new people in the world. They don't have that lived experience yet. They are still very primitive in their needs early on. And that's our job as caregivers to meet them where they are. And the other piece with the good is I do find that it's sometimes good is just used as a word to say complacent and quiet. And I really, really struggle with that because sometimes we're putting so much pressure on complacency and conformity, and that really what we're trying to say is the baby fit well into my existing adult life. And babies are not supposed to do that. If they did, parenting wouldn't be so hard, like they just they'd all fit right in and we'd all have a positive time all the time. Um, but we have babies that have different temperaments, and it's unfair to have kids that have different needs, different regulations, different temperaments that they can't control, that we want to make sure that we're not impacting a negative view of their ability or the way that they're viewed by the caregivers, that we're tying this quality of goodness to it. That's just something that they can't control yet. All right, I'm gonna keep moving right along. But if anybody has anything time sensitive, please keep putting it in the chat. Otherwise, I see some comments. We'll get to them in a little bit. All right, how do these sit with you? Children should be fed on a strict schedule. Mothers should breastfeed their babies in order to maximize development. And children should only eat organic food. Okay, so when I do this one with educators, and it makes me giggle how many of them will be like, oh no, they shouldn't be fed on a strict schedule. That we have to follow the child's lead and what they need. And then we kind of talk it through a little bit. I'm like, all right, so tell me about your schedule. If you're in an infant room, if you're in a toddler room, tell me what the schedule looks like. And very quickly we realize that it's not strict like It's 8:32, you may have your bottle now, but you really can't feed whenever. You're only given so many bottles, and we have to space them throughout the day to fit 2 to 3 hour increments. Otherwise, that child will be starving by the end of the day. In the toddler room, we are bound by so many licensing and accreditation rules that we cannot make sure that they're that or allow them to eat throughout the day. We have to sanitize the table that has 10 different steps. There must be an adult present to make sure that they're not choking. Everything has to be, you can only have food out of the fridge for so many amount of minutes, and then we have to put it back or you have to get another one. It's not strict again, like it's 8:32, breakfast is now over. But there is a point in time that we do say food is not available. These are the other activities. We can distract you if you're hungry. And later we will come back together and have our next meal, right? Versus when babies are in a one-on-one situation, or if toddlers are in a one-on-one situation, they may be able to eat throughout the day. They may be able to eat in small increments rather than larger meals and 3 meals and 2 snacks, right? Similarly, when we have breastfeeding, being able to breastfeed on demand is a completely different amount of nutrition and food throughout the day versus when they are in a multi-care setting and they are not able to rewarm that milk. If the baby only drinks a little, that's the bottle, it's done. We're not allowed to rewarm it, right? Where if we're breastfeeding or chest feeding throughout the day, milk is always available. It's always warm. We're good to go, right? The the shoulds in all three of these statements is something that I think is what that trigger has been for a lot of people, is that when we read this statement initially, it may jump out like, oh no, we can't say should, because that's where we're putting an emphasis on one thing that's correct or something that's not. But even if you take the word out of the sentence, that statement is felt. There's a lot of judgment. Even still, I feel like there's been a lot of movement and a lot of controversies and messaging changing, especially in the last few decades. We're moving a lot, personally, I feel we're moving a lot more towards fed is best, but there's still a lot of pressure for mothers to feel that this is something they have to do in order to be a good mom or in order to care for their child. And whether or not they have the ability to, if they're able to produce enough milk, if they're well enough, if they choose not to, that it is hard to overcome that stigma of I'm not doing what is expected of me, or I'm not doing this the way that somebody else thinks is the right way to parent, right? Thinking through as well, some of those insecurities then appear later when we have older children with food. I, for me, if I could give my kid organic for every meal, everything, um, I mean, I think it would cost me more than my student loans to become Doc Holliday, right? Groceries are ridiculously expensive right now. But if NPR got a penny for every time they said inflation, they would stop doing their donor pages of trying to get us to drop money all the time. But organic is even more expensive. When we have statements like that, what it's saying quietly is, if you're not doing this, you're not doing enough for your kid. You don't love them enough. If centers are not able to provide fully organic meals, are we then judging their capability of taking care of children compared to another place that may have full organic, but they also have a much higher price tag on their enrollment? We also have to be very careful of the populations that we work with, so that we're not having, or we're aware of that these feelings may be out there, and these are messages they may be getting from other people in their community or from social media or wherever it's coming from. Because you don't have a choice when you receive food from a shelter, or from donation. When you're on WIC and SNAP, you're doing the best that you can to feed your family with a ridiculously small amount of money being provided to you. They're doing the best that they can, and we need to help support them in that, because again, thinking back to what we said earlier, that's going to go into that cycle of my self-care, my regulation as a parent. If I feel like I'm being shamed that I'm not doing enough for my child, and my hands are tied, this isn't what I want for them either, but I don't know what else I can do. This is the place that I'm in. then they need somebody to be in their corner and saying, you're doing the best you can. Your child is healthy, your child is happy with you, your relationship with them matters more, and really supporting them through that. Okay. I'm way too excited about all of this. I have way too many more statements. So I'm going to skip through the next few. I'll show you them, but I'm not going to talk because I know we're getting short on time. But I could go on and on about like some of the cultural ties with some of these statements. So the sooner children learn to feed and dress themselves, use the toilet, the better off they will be as adults. This is a statement that you may find some people strongly believe because we are from more of a Western culture where we really value independence, and early on independence as being a sign of what will come later. In other cultures, that is not the case. You know, it's not that they're babying children longer. It's just not the expectation that children do things independently quite as early. And again, it's really looking at those appropriate expectations and are they able to meet their healthy version of themselves when they are adults? Are they able to function in the community that they're growing in? Children should always mind and obey their parents and caregivers. Because I said so is the only reason adults need to give. A baby cannot be depressed. Music is important for brain development and healthy development. Okay, so I know we're rushing through this, but hopefully you've taken a second to really see how these are sitting with you and where you're finding yourselves. I know as somebody in this world, we understand mental health on a way that the general public does not. And that statement, a baby cannot be depressed, that is a really, really hard and sensitive topic to try to get around. And how to explain that in a way of embracing and empowering those adults and caregivers around the baby to know that they may be doing as best they can and this may still exist, you know, and the baby may still be showing signs of depression or another mental health symptom that they need extra support with, and how to get them to again not start that negative cycle of, you know, the adult feeling that they're not doing enough or they're dysregulated and it's affecting the baby. How do we back it up so that we're supporting them and we're really acknowledging things that are completely out of their control that may be affecting the child? Things like larger systemic issues, systemic racism, how that those larger systems are then pulling into the way that the adults are interacting with that child. I said I wouldn't talk about this, but I know we're running short. If you don't agree with the last statement, though, I do want you to email me afterward because I'm going to take you out for coffee and change your mind, because I could nerd out about how music positively affects the body and the brain, especially, for days. Super cool. Super cool. Okay. So what now? When we use this intake, and this can be something that you do with your staff, you do for yourself, it can be just something that you do with parents. I found somebody that I had worked with had done this with the parents, and they did it in an anonymous way because they didn't want the parents to feel on the spot if they were, you know, the only outlier in a certain reaction. But it gave them the space to start that conversation and just to have the results publicly posted in an anonymous way that just said what everybody agreed to this. Strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree. And it started that conversation, and little by little, people were more comfortable with, you know, explaining their point of view with each of those. But the one piece that I want to bring up here is that building this awareness is a good first step. And that's what this is. It's just starting the conversation, making sure we are looking into ourselves and being reflective, but it has to continue. We keep evolving as people. We keep having new life experiences. Our, you know, what we used to take for granted in our background will change over time. And that is going to keep changing as the kids change, as we change, as society changes. So just doing this once is not enough. This is something that we have to keep coming back to and make sure that we're always reflecting on it. And then two tricky questions here. How do we reconcile the differences between what we believe and what families believe to be true? And how can we compromise as educators? Sorry, I meant to change that to professionals who are held to certain rules and regulations while also meeting the cultural expectations of families. These are really difficult questions that we don't have simple answers for. And hopefully you have some wonderful reflective supervision in place that you can go meet with somebody else when these types of conversations are coming up, or these types of things that you're like, I just don't know what to do, or I don't know if I'm looking at this correctly. I want to get a second opinion, right? Hopefully that's where some of this is coming out. Some of the ways that you can do this is by making sure that we're always using open, inquisitive language, developing a safe space so families can speak open and honestly. I know I'm telling you things you already know. But the third one here, being really conscious of phrases with judgmental undertones. Now, these statements, some of them are just really obvious, right? Like they're designed to make you feel a certain way and have a reaction. But there are many times that we say things that if you had heard it later on, if it was written down and you saw it again, you're like, oh, I don't know if I should have said it that way, right? So saying things like, tell me more about what meal times look like for your family. That's different than saying, does your child sit in a high chair? Do they sit on your lap? Do they sit on the floor? Do you eat at a table? Do you eat together as a family? Do they eat individually? Do they eat in the back of the car because you're driving the other kid to soccer? Does your child use utensils? Do you feed them? That's too much. We're peppering families with questions. If we really want to understand where they're coming from, ask a type of question that's more like, tell me more about, or I haven't had a request like that before. Tell me more about that. Leading in that way is going to give the power back to the families to then share. Hopefully you'll learn a lot about their culture, their home culture, and what's specific to them, so that we have a much better understanding of how to support them and the baby going forward. And of course, we want to do those things as frequently as possible. We want to have those great relationships because you are going to have times where you're going to have more challenging conversations. And having that good relationship is going to make this much easier. How do we interact with or explain laws and regulations to families who move to this area that might be in conflict with their cultural beliefs? When people are moving from a place where children did not need to be in car seats, when we have people not too long ago arrested in New York for leaving their child sleeping outside in their stroller because they were visiting from another country. And then always being mindful that we are mandated reporters in most cases, that this is where it can get a little gray, like that in my state's regulations, it says that if I believe a child's health or well-being is at substantial risk of being harmed, I should report. That is a lot of subjective decisions on my part. Some things are obvious, right? There's a fire and the baby is sitting in the middle of it. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's pretty obvious. But there will be times that something comes up. Maybe it's around spanking. Maybe it's around, maybe not as obvious as leaving the child outdoors, but maybe it's something similar about, we've discussed safe sleep practices, but we notice that the child is consistently sleeping in a car seat during the night. Like at what point do we decide whether or not this is something that it's something that we need to report? And I encourage you all to make sure that you're having these conversations with your supervisor, with your colleagues, because the other piece of this is we need to check ourselves, and we need to make sure that we're checking our own biases, and we're checking that we're not pushing our beliefs onto someone else, but that we're also not holding back too much, that we're potentially allowing more risk to enter. That is going to be really hard. That doesn't get easier. Hopefully over time with more practice, it will. But it's going to be there. It's going to be tough. Okay, so I have talked way too much. I'm going to give you some space now. I'll stop talking. If you have questions, if anything, any reflections, if anything sat with you in a certain way and made you feel a certain way, I'd love to hear from you if you have questions. And while we're doing that, while I'm pulling up the chat, I'm going to put up this, again, this is in the information about in the PowerPoint slides that have been shared. But if you wanted to take a quick screenshot, this is where the parenting inventory came from.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. I want to give people a pause to see if they have specific questions, but I know because you've been presenting, you may not have noticed how electrified the chat is. So a lot
Oh,
of things that
yay.
you're saying are resonating with people and resonating amongst each other. But there is one question that's posted here. I don't know if you can see it, but can you discuss the idea about boys and girls being treated differently? And also props to you for an amazing presentation.
Oh, thanks. Um, I have found personally, it still really depends on where we are. I went to college in the South, and I won't say exactly where, but there's an expectation that these pretty little girls are walking in with these giant bows on their head, right? They're huge, they're sparkly, it's screaming, I was born with a vagina. And there's just these feelings of women should be more, not submissive, but they should be more polished. They should be more refined. That there's still more of that feeling of we were even I'm not that old. I don't know. It's gonna take me a minute to do math. We were still being encouraged to wear dresses more than pants when we're going into classrooms, of hiding our tattoos because that's not feminine, and there's still these feelings that exist and normalized. There's more than when I am in places like I live right outside DC. I'm from New York. I was in Portland, and these are much more. Um, there's so much more of a diversity that I feel like in those cases we see kids really being encouraged to be them. There's more gender neutral clothing. There's more gender neutral toys, and the conversations with parents are going to be different in some places. That you're going to have some where the families may feel a certain way if the boy is dressing up and playing in the kitchen and the girl is making a giant mess with the blocks and being really loud, right? And having, again, just trying to see where the families are coming from and where is their concern. Like what could go wrong if your child does not meet those social expectations of their gender? What is the fear there, or what's the disconnect of why they don't want them to do that, um, in a respectful way, but also helping to comfort them to say, like, there's no research background to say that, because your child does X, Y, and Z, that ABC is going to happen. I think that might be a really good way to just tiptoe into that so that we're supporting them, we're acknowledging their beliefs and what they've grown up with, but also saying at the same time, we really want to support the child in this too. I do feel like I'm rambling, so tell me at some point if that was helpful.
There was a specific question a couple people wanted to know about how they could access the inventory you were mentioning.
Okay. Let me see if I can throw it in the chat real quick. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
But it is in the handouts.
Okay. If it's in the handouts, everyone will be able to access that through our website or the attendee hub, including
Yes.
all the slides and a recording of this presentation if you want to listen again or share it with others. All right, we have about 2 more minutes if there's another question. I'm trying to see right here. Basically, it's a ton of resonating. And kudos for how amazing the presentation was. I was going to say there were a couple things I felt like people were really having connection points around that I was noticing, talking about the dangers of equating love with resources. And also I think people were struck by, through the presentation, just the fact that there are so many different ways to achieve success. And what we mean by that, of course, is raising healthy and happy children. And certainly the idea of that good is not necessarily quiet, because we have to check ourselves, right? Because sometimes a child being really quiet is specifically not a good thing. There can be other reasons why that is happening. So at any rate, so we are almost at time. So if there are not any other questions, again, you guys can access the presentation and the recording on our website. Thank you again, Doc Holliday. I think people are ready for round 2 because they want to hear about music and brain development. So that'll have to be your next.
Okay, I have so much I want to talk to you.
The COE. Okay. All right. Thanks everyone for your time, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
If you do want to keep chatting, that's my email address. There's website.